Good evening, everybody, and welcome to what is our 7th community webinar in a series of community webinars about our new draft Willoughby Comprehensive LEP and draft DCP. And tonight we're providing a local community briefing for Naremburn. My name's Norma Shanky-Williams, and I'm the Strategic Planning Team Leader. And on behalf of Willoughby City Council, I wish to acknowledge the traditional inhabitants of the land on which we stand, the Aboriginal people, their spirits and ancestors. We acknowledge the vital contribution that Indigenous people and cultures have made and still make to the nation we share, Australia. Now, before we start tonight, I thought it's proven very useful in previous webinars that we show this short video with the Mayor Tanya Taylor and Dr. Deborah Deering from the Greater Sydney Commission. So we'll cue the video, which gives you a little overview of the LEP and the DCP as proposed.
Willoughby is a wonderful place to live. It is a city of diversity with beautiful landscapes, people, and of course our vibrant CBD.
Willoughby is a very diverse place. It has an important centre at Chatswood. It has some really much loved and very successful local centres.
Our residents really value our beautiful bushlands and of course our urban environment and our CBD.
It has a range of housing, quite a number of apartments, and also a lot of lower density areas. It has important heritage precincts.
Willoughby City Council is committed to delivering a city that is green, livable, inclusive, connected, prosperous and vibrant. Over the last 5 years, we've engaged with the community to help us develop the Local Environment Plan.
The Local Environment Plan, commonly called the LEP, is the planning instrument which actually sets the framework for future development.
In 2012, we created the Local Environment Plan to help us plan and decide what is built and where in Willoughby.
That's been proposed for change, significant changes. For example, in Chatswood, it is an important commercial place for the whole of the district, and even within Sydney, it has a key role. We want to make sure that's facilitated and expanded into the future. But it's hoped and anticipated that Chatswood will grow to be an even more important commercial centre than it isn't at this point in time. You will see in the LEP some major changes to the heights for commercial buildings and also the introduction of more apartment buildings close to the services around the Chatswood CBD.
It also covers affordable housing, environmental issues and bushfire hazards. The Local Environment Plan outlines subdivision sizes, heights of buildings and the amount of floor space area on which you can build. The plan allocates land for specific purposes through zoning and sets standards for development. It aims to provide jobs and housing growth, more medium and high density living, as well as strengthening the character of our CBD. It will help us design our homes for the future. It helps us guide conservation of cultural heritage as well as protect environmentally sensitive land. It helps us create a better place to live with more trees and connected pathways and cycleways.
We also want to link one green space to the other green space so that it's not just isolated green spaces and recreation opportunities, but they can be a network where they can be readily reached by foot, not needing to take a car. They're opportunities that we need to try to grow into the future. While COVID has thrown up some uncertainty about the pace of change, we do know that cities do grow. Willoughby is a very desirable place in the Greater Sydney area. Sydney is a very desirable city. It will grow into the future.
The plan helps us to set our strategic vision for the future.
Being prepared is important and planning ahead is crucial.
So hopefully you found that a bit of an informative overview to start the evening. It gives you a flavour of what's uppermost in our minds as we're planning for the new LEP and DCP. So as I said, my name's Norma Shanky-Williams. I'll be starting off the presentation this evening and I head up the strategic planning team here at Council. We're joined by Andrew Wheeler from the North Sydney Local Health District, a colleague of ours at the Local Health District. We'll talk about the importance of healthy built environments as we're doing our planning here in Willoughby. Chris Newen and my team will talk about the details around the Naremburn elements of the draft LEP and DCP, and Ian Arnott will talk about more general elements of the proposed planning changes and provisions that we've got on exhibition at the moment. Though you'll find there's some common slides in these webinars. If you've watched a webinar already or attended any of these other events, you'll see that some of these slides are common. We want that common message to be a consistent message. So it's important that we show a similar slide deck every time, but tailor it, of course, for each of the local centres that we're dealing with. So I would like to welcome, there's nearly 100 people registered tonight on the webinar, and we have a nice selection of people in the room, in the chamber tonight, which is very pleasing. Welcome to you too. Mayor Tanya Taylor is also joining us this evening, as are councillors Nick Wright, Georgie Rusak, Robert Samuel and Anna Greco. So welcome to all of those councillors too in our meeting tonight. Questions can be submitted at any time in the Q&A function of the Zoom, so please do that. And there'll be an opportunity for questions in the room later on at the end of the presentation tonight. Now, staff will be able to respond to these questions tonight on the Q&A if they're straightforward. We've got staff here to do that. If they require more detail or more consideration, we'll do that within a fortnight, and it will be sent back to the people who are asking those questions. So they'll be provided with those responses. We'll take, as I say, some verbal questions at the end of the presentation, both from the webinar attendees and from the room here tonight. And if you've got any comments that are not questions, just please put those in the chat area of the Zoom, and we'll see those as well and be able to respond to those if need be. Cameras are switched off and microphones are muted to reduce the background noise. And because the webinar is being recorded, as you know, and will be available on Have Your Say by the end of the next day, people in the chamber should note that, because your image and voice may be recorded and publicly broadcast and archived. So you should understand that's the requirements of being here in the chamber. So for the agenda tonight, I'll provide a bit of a strategic planning background as to how we've arrived where we are on exhibition with these draft documents, talk a little bit about some zoning changes that the state government, who've also been very busy in terms of planning work, have put forward. Then I'll hand over to, as I say, my colleague at the North Sydney Local Health District to talk about healthy built environments in Willoughby. And we'll then go on to Chris talking about the Narimban Local Centre more specifically, with Ian following up with some general advice about the draft LEP and DCP, and then there'll be time for questions before we close at 7:30. So the headline changes for these documents that are on exhibition. Probably one of the most important things is the way we're growing Chatswood CBD along the rail corridor to the north and south, in line with the CBD strategy that many of you will already be familiar with. It's certainly had a lot of airplay over recent years, and it's been publicly exhibited and endorsed not only by council but by the state government. So it's an unusual thing to have a local strategy endorsed by state government, but the CBD strategy has been. We're also looking at increased densities in our local centres, of which Naremburn is one, in line with the local centre strategy that was adopted by council and also publicly exhibited. So we would have met in the past, quite a few of us, in discussions over that local centre strategy and the various iterations that it went through before it was finally endorsed by council. We're also providing or proposing more height and density in industrial zones, which we consider very important and valuable land for a future sustainable city. And we want to encourage innovation and new investment in those industrial lands for productive uses and new local employment opportunities. And that's also in line with our industrial land strategy adopted by council. There'll be a new design excellence requirement in the new document that's proposed to make sure we get the best quality development in Willoughby that we can. We're also proposing an increase in the affordable housing contribution from the current 4%, which is applied at DA stage, up to 10%, in line with the encouragement that we were given in the North District Plan to do that. And we're also including provisions for managing urban heat impacts, which we are very conscious of are going to increase as the climate warms and our buildings maybe don't respond as well as they could. We're providing a proposal to align our residential controls with the exempt and complying state policy, the Code SEP as it's called, And Ian will talk a little bit more about that later this evening. And we're moving our landscaping controls because we believe they are so important to the character, the quality of Willoughby, its ongoing biodiversity health, and indeed our own health in terms of urban heat, to move from the DCP, which is a less powerful document, if you like, in the hierarchy of planning documents, into the LEP, which has a statutory basis. So we're giving more strength to our landscaping controls. In the DCP, we're strengthening our heritage controls, keeping them largely as they are, but improving and strengthening them, and reducing the parking requirements, particularly for railway precincts such as Chatswood, Artarmon and St Leonard's. And of course, these documents are all on a 12-week exhibition period, which is much longer than we're required to exhibit documents like this for, but we believe they're of such an important nature and so complex that we really need to give the community as much time as possible to consider not only what they contain, but then their submissions to provide us with their feedback on whether they think we've got it right or whether there's more that needs to be done. Can't talk now, sorry. It's 12 weeks it started, it ends on the 7th of June, the exhibition period. So this process diagram shows you that the LEP, as it currently stands as a proposed document, has not come out of thin air, but is really based on all the strategic planning work we've been doing over the last 4 or 5 years, based on our CBD strategy, our housing strategy, local centres, industrial lands and affordable housing. We have an integrated transport strategy, and the work that the state government did in collaboration with the 3 local councils around St Leonard's, Crow's Nest. And of course, the North District Plan, which has guided the work we've done on our LEP. In addition to that, all councils were required to deliver a local strategic planning statement, which we did in 2020, to try and demonstrate how we will deliver the district planning objectives down into our local planning documents. So that local strategic planning statement really sets the blueprint for what we are trying to achieve in our LEP and DCP. So from that basis, we drafted the LEP, which is called a planning proposal, and we provided that to the local planning panel, the WLPP, for advice. They supported it. We reported that to council, who agreed to refer it to the Department of Planning and Environment for what's called a gateway determination, asking if we can put these documents on exhibition. Are they sufficiently appropriate for that? And that gateway decision was given on Christmas Eve, actually, December 2021, how thrilling that was, with some requirements that we had to meet before we could actually put it on exhibition. And those gateway requirements have now been satisfied, and here we are at the red box, effectively on exhibition for 3 months, 12 weeks. So it's been a long journey. The current LEP, the 2012 LEP, was started in 2006. So these things take a long time to bring to fruition. It was exhibited in 2010 and re-exhibited in 2012, which may be the fate of our draft LEP2 to be re-exhibited. We have to wait and see, and came into force in 2013. So it's now 9 years old, and there's been not just 22, in fact, I think 23 amendments now made to that plan. So it's in need of refreshment, not just because of its age, but because there are now these new aims and objectives delivered from the Greater Sydney Commission, now the Greater Cities Commission, of course, because they've moved into the Hunter and the Illawarra as well. But they have provided the district planning work that has guided local councils across metropolitan Sydney. So we need to reflect that work in our local planning instruments across the whole metropolitan area. The local strategic planning statement I referred to before was delivered by council in 2020 and sets that 20-year vision with priorities and actions for the whole LGA. And not only the whole LGA, but really all the areas that we are concerned about in the LGA in terms of housing, transport, health, economy, biodiversity, climate change, resilience. It's a very comprehensive document that sets targets for the future. And it guides what we have come up with in our draft LEP and DCP. And it's been quite a challenge to take a strategic document like that and translate it into what is quite a legalistic document of the LEP and DCP. So we're very keen to hear what the community think about the job we've done on that, whether we've hit the mark or that we need to tighten up certain things or include things we've overlooked. We're very keen to hear feedback on how we've done in translating the LSPS into the LEP and DCP as we now have in draft form. So just to reiterate, the new draft LEP is drawn from the conclusions and recommendations from our existing strategies delivered over the last 4 or 5 years. The local centres, the CBD, the industrial lands, Crow's Nest plan that was delivered by the state government, Willoughby housing strategy, and our integrated transport strategy. And we are also trying to respond to the new Resilient Willoughby strategy and action plan, because resilience is such an important element of what we have to think about for the future. Our Resilient Willoughby strategy strives for resilient places to withstand climate change and sustain biodiversity and support vibrant connected communities. So we have to provide controls that will deliver that and provide legalistic provisions that will end up with more resilient places, we hope, and resilient buildings, which are safe, well-designed, affordable and sustainable. It's quite a challenge, let me tell you. And when you have to translate it into legalese, as I call it, it can be quite almost an unsurmountable challenge that you want to achieve these things, but how do you actually translate it into a statutory document? In terms of some key statistics that are in our mind, we did actually hear Dr. Deborah Deering talk on the video about how COVID has had an impact on growth, as we all know. But the city will continue to grow into the future. There's no doubt about that. And our population is expected to grow to almost 92,000 by 2036. We're planning for 6,700 new dwellings to that date too. That's our sort of ballpark new number of dwellings that we need to provide. We met our dwelling target, which was just a 5-year dwelling target in the North District Plan of 1250. So that was met. But and new dwelling targets will be provided in due course by the Greater Cities Commission. But we know ourselves from the work we've done on our housing strategy that that's about the figure that we need to provide within the different parts of Willoughby LGA. We're also planning for an increase in jobs. We're expecting our jobs to grow to 74,000, over 74,000 in 2036. And we have jobs targets for those particular strategic centres, which are St Leonard's and Chatswood. St Leonard's is a shared jobs target, so it's a little less clear about how much Willoughby has to provide of that overarching jobs target. But we know in Chatswood, our target is 6,300 to 8,300, which is why we're so focused on that commercial core in Chatswood and keeping that for jobs and commerce, and not allowing residential to invade that central part of Chatswood, but to allow residential around the fringe of the CBD. So it's still walkable to the transport interchange and other services. At the same time of been doing this work, the state government have been very busy on a lot of other reforms that they've been doing. And we thought we'd mention in this, with relevance to this work, that they have already made changes to environmental zones. So they've changed all the environmental E zones to C zones, conservation zones. So that you should be aware of that change to naming. It's essentially just a cosmetic change, but it's important that we know that, and that will be reflected in the documents going forward. But they're also currently exposing us to a new change in employment zones, our industrial IN and B business zones, which we've got on exhibition at the moment with our draft LEP and DCP. So these are a little bit more, there's more to these changes than the environment zone changes. They're wrapping up existing zones into new zones and calling them employment zones. And there may be some different uses that are going to be allowed in those zones. So we're being very careful about how we see a transition into this new zoning regime that's being handed down from state government. So you might want to look at that too. That's also on exhibition at the moment. So now I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Andrew Wheeler, and he's going to talk about creating a healthy built environment in Willoughby, which for us is an extremely important aspect of the work we're doing. Thank you, Andrew.
Well, thank you, Norma, and good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. As Norma said, my name's Andrew Wheeler. I'm the Manager of Healthy Built Environments at Northern Sydney Local Health District. And if you haven't heard of Northern Sydney Local Health District before, we are part of New South Wales Health, and we operate across the local government areas in the Northern Sydney region of Sydney. So 9 of those, one of which is Willoughby City Council. The Healthy Built Environments program that I manage exists to help improve people's health and wellbeing in Northern Sydney by creating healthier environments, ones which support our health as part of everyday living. And the broad banner under which we operate, known as population health, focuses on the conditions that keep people healthy and out of hospital. So as we meet here tonight to discuss two important documents that will shape Willoughby and the lives of those who live and work in Willoughby City Council for many years to come, I thank Council for inviting us to talk about the important connection between our health and the built environment. And by way of background, when I refer to the built environment, what I mean is the human-made spaces in which we live, work and play on a daily basis. So our homes, buildings, streets, sidewalks, transport corridors, and so on. And in this short presentation, I'm going to provide you with an overview of the connection between the built environment and our health in order to set the context for tonight's presentation and discussion on the draft Willoughby LEP and DCP. However, before I do, I have a question for everyone here, both in person and tuning in online, and it's a simple one, and that's what makes you feel healthy? And secondly, how does the neighbourhood that you live in contribute to your health and well-being, both positively and negatively? And you can put your responses in the chat that's down the bottom there if you're tuning in online. So how does the neighbourhood that you live in contribute to your health and well-being, both positively and negatively? Well, what we know is that all built environments are not created equal, and that the environments in which we live have a profound impact on both our physical and mental health. And healthy built environments support positive health outcomes by making healthy and active lifestyle choices easier. And now, an excellent resource that summarises the many ways in which the built environment impacts our health is the New South Wales Healthy Built Environments Checklist. And this checklist is based on 11 key themes that you can see here. And what ties these 11 themes together is the concept of healthy neighbourhood design. And healthy neighbourhood design is facilitated by land use and development decisions as informed by documents such as local environmental plans and development control plans that prioritise complete, compact and connected communities. Now, communities that reflect these qualities support physical activity along safe and well-connected tree-lined streets and paths. They also facilitate planned and incidental social interaction as people have greater opportunities to meet at easily accessible destinations, such as local shops and centres, and also areas of green open space. They also support business activity and a strong local economy, and they connect people to key services such as public transport when they do need to go beyond their local neighbourhood for work or leisure purposes. Now, this diagram you can see here captures these features of a healthy neighbourhood. You can see a neighbourhood designed around a connected and walkable street network, linking to key destinations that are also co-located. So, for example, you might have a primary school next to a library or a community centre and areas of open space and local shops. And what this does is it reduces the reliance on the motor car for short trips, which in turn reduces local traffic congestion. It promotes healthier and more sustainable forms of transport like walking and cycling. And it encourages people to spend time in their local neighbourhood and builds a stronger sense of community and place in doing so. So there you have an example of how zoning and development controls can facilitate complete, compact and connected communities, and the ways in which these communities promote our physical and mental health by encouraging physical activity, opportunities for social interaction, and also access to healthy food at local shops or markets. Now, a central focus of the draft Willoughby LEP and DCP is housing, the third theme of the checklist there. And from a health perspective, the research evidence is clear that the healthiest neighbourhoods are typically characterised by a diversity of housing types, with more compact housing, such as apartments and townhouses, located near centres, such as in the example seen here of Chatswood, CBD and surrounds, and also in many other areas within Willoughby City Council. Now, the word density can sometimes concern people, but what we know is that higher density housing that is well designed and appropriately located has an important role to play in accommodating future population growth and providing people with more affordable housing options. We know that housing is a fundamental health need, and a diversity of housing types facilitates a diverse community, one in which people of all ages can grow and develop over time. And so thankfully, through appropriate zoning and development controls and design quality, we're setting a new benchmark for higher density housing by incorporating elements such as green roofs and walls, as well as measures to activate streetscapes and also to avoid overshadowing, for example, of public open space. But with all that said, as our city becomes more compact, we also have to invest in open space, and not just the quantity of open space, but particularly the quality of open space. We know from research that open space and access to quality open space within walking distance to where people live and work is associated with a range of positive health benefits. For example, time spent in green space reduces type 2 diabetes, blood pressure, premature death, preterm birth, and a range of other chronic health conditions. And of course, green and natural vegetation also contributes to a healthy planet, which leads me to the final theme of this presentation, which is environmental sustainability and climate change. And these interrelated themes are both major public health issues, and we can design our neighbourhoods in ways that protect our valuable natural habitats, that provide shading from buildings and trees, as you can see in the example here, and which mitigate against urban heat, future-proofing our communities against natural hazards as well, not just heat, but also disasters like floods and bushfires. And heat is a particular pertinent issue. In New South Wales, for example, in 2020, more people died of heat than car accidents, and heat-related deaths account for more deaths than all other natural disasters combined. So heat's a particularly pertinent issue. So there you have an example of some of the key elements of how the built environment relates to our health, but particularly how it's connected to the development control plan and the local environmental plan that's on exhibition at the moment. So we've begun the presentation with a question, and I want to end with another question, which is, how will the neighbourhood that you live in contribute to your community's health and wellbeing over the next 15 to 20 years? The future is not just a place we're going, it's a place we're creating, and documents such as these have a profound impact on how we will live and the impact of our environments on our health for many years to come. So I hope this presentation has served as food for thought as you think through that, and as you have a voice in the future of shaping Willoughby City Council. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Andrew. That's always so useful, I think, to put us in the right frame of mind and remind us how important human health is, and that we have a healthy built environment in our uppermost in our mind, foremost in our mind when we're doing our planning work for the LEP and DCP. So now I'm going to hand over to Chris Newen, who's going to look at the specific details of the draft LEP and DCP for Naremburn.
Thanks, Norma. Hi, everyone. My name is Christopher Newen, and I work at Willoughby Council as a strategic planner. And my role today is to present what key changes will occur for the Narimban Local Centre that's being proposed within the new Willoughby Local Environmental Plan and Willoughby Development Control Plan. As we know, the Narimban Local Centre is fronting Willoughby Road, and there are commercial shops that run along Willoughby Road. But also the Narimban Local Centre also includes 7 residential lots that are behind the row of shops along Willoughby Road that front Glenmore Street. I'm here to talk to you today about the key changes being proposed in the LEP and DCP that will change the Narimban local centre in order to improve the centre for the community, but to also provide additional housing at an appropriate scale. So some of the existing strengths of the Narimban local centre include the heritage items. As you can see here, they have great character, great amenity, and we are looking to preserve these heritage items and to build on their strengths. There's also really interesting shop facades, as you can see on the bottom left corner. So in my opinion, these provide a greater amenity to the local centre, and they're really valued, and we seek to maintain, of course, the heritage items and their status, as well as the shop facades that provide visual interest to the community. There's also a range of attractive cafes, restaurant shops, and a range of services as well. So some of you may have already seen this document that Norma already spoke about. It's the Willoughby Local Centre Strategy, and it really guided what we're trying to achieve in the Narimban Local Centre. So the Local Centre Strategy was adopted a few years ago, and our goals, as I've already mentioned, is to retain the fine grain shop fronts fronting Willoughby Road. We also enabling the provision of shop top housing of up to 3 to 4 stories. We also envision providing a public open space to the rear away from Willoughby Road, as we feel that, as we touched on before, it would be nice to have a public open space for the community that's walkable, that promotes healthy living. We also are investigating relocating parking within the Narimban Local Centre. Currently, there's parking fronting Willoughby Road to the front, and we will investigate whether there is possibility for parking to the rear of the site. And any opportunity, we are also investigating any opportunity for a new public plaza behind the shops that currently front Willoughby Road. As you'll see later on in this presentation, we are changing certain controls which may enable a larger site on the corner of Quayamong Street to allow for a larger building. This may provide something such as a small supermarket, because currently right now, Narimban Local Centre doesn't really have a grocery store to service the community. I imagine that people in Narimban go to Crow's Nest for their grocery shopping. So we are exploring whether something like that would be valuable to the community, to have a small grocery store so people can walk there to obtain goods. So this is the master plan for the Narimban Local Centre, which was also included in the Willoughby Local Centre Strategy, which was adopted by Council. I have to say that this is a conceptual drawing. It doesn't indicate what's going to be built there or what the council will or won't accept. It's a conceptual drawing that shows the council goals for the Narimban Local Centre. So as you can see here, we're allowing for the provision of 3 to 4 stories with shop top housing fronting Willoughby Road. We're retaining the heritage buildings and the shop front facades at front Willoughby Road. We are investigating whether public parking can be relocated to the rear of the site rather than fronting Willoughby Road to improve the amenity of the local centre, and whether a new public plaza can be provided to the rear of the site to improve accessibility, pedestrian accessibility through the site as well, when you walk from Willoughby Road. I'll just go to the next slide. So I guess what's in everyone's mind is, how will the council achieve this conceptual vision through the controls in the local environmental plan and the Willoughby Development Control Plan? So this is currently the outline of the Narimban Local Centre. And you can see here, with the existing context, there are 7 single dwellings to the rear of the commercial shops along Willoughby Road. And the new Willoughby Local Environmental Plan proposes to rezone those sites from R3 medium density residential to B1 neighbourhood centre to permit the ability for the development of shop top housing up to a maximum of 4 stories. There's also a change to the provision of floor space ratio. So as you can see here with the existing local environmental plan, there's an FSR allowance of 0.9 to 1 for the single dwellings. However, this is not enough to facilitate a shop top housing development up to a maximum of 4 stories. So that FSR amount is proposed to be changed to 1 to 1 for those 7 lots to the western side of the Narimban within that boundary. We are also proposing to increase the FSR, as you can see, for the northeastern corner site to 1.9 to 1 to allow a maximum 6-story building, to allow for the provision of additional shop top housing, as well as I previously said, perhaps maybe a small grocery store or maybe something else that's valuable to the community as well. There's no change to any of the controls in the LEP for sites south of Rohan Street. So those existing shops, as well as the heritage item with the nice facade, there's no change to the controls for those properties, as we'd like to maintain them as they are. There is a proposed change to maximum height limits in order to facilitate what I showed you in the conceptual master plan. So as you can see on the proposed side, we're proposing a maximum height limit of 14 meters to allow for 4-story shop top housing, but to also allow for the capability for that public open space to be provided if a development was to occur here. We're also increasing the maximum height limit for the northeastern corner site to 20 meters to allow for a 6-story shop top housing building that faces the freeway. The heritage item, which contains a cafe, there's no change to the height limit there because as we're maintaining the heritage item. And of course, as you can see here, there's no change in the height limit to the properties south of Rohan Street. So why are we making these changes? We're really guided based on the local centre strategy that we conducted and was adopted by council. We're retaining the heritage items and the existing facades with heritage character because we recognise their value to the community. But there's also a need for not just more housing, but different types of housing to meet housing needs for the community as well. We'd like to improve the walkability of the local centre and hope that there's an opportunity to provide a public open space for the community, as public open space is quite hard to obtain and there is a scarcity of it. And we're trying to strike an appropriate balance between providing commercial and residential space to meet needs for the future, as well as at an appropriate scale as well. This is another conceptual master plan drawing that's included, that was included in the local centre strategy and will be included within our Willoughby Development Control Plan. As you can see on the right there, there's a list of controls that's associated with the conceptual master plan to ensure appropriate built forms. So I'll just give an example. We really want to maintain the shop frontage facades. And so anything above the existing 2 stories, where we have a control for a 3-meter setback so that any new development does not remove the existing facades or I guess be intrusive to those elements because they're quite visually interesting and valuable to the local centre. There's also specific controls to facilitate, I guess, the vision of what we're trying to achieve here. And also for that northeastern corner site, anything above 4 stories will require a 6-meter setback for the highest 2 stories. So the Narimban Local Centre is subject to affordable housing controls. So any new development here would have to provide 4% affordable housing. We did explore whether 10% could be provided, as we're aiming for. However, the Narimban Local Centre is quite a small area. And in terms of feasibility, we don't think that 10% is not capable of being provided here in terms of a development to achieve the outcomes that we desire. So that's in our LEP. It's included in area 3 of the map. So affordable housing requirements will be applicable for development within the Narimban Local Centre. There's also a design excellence clause within our proposed local environmental plan. What this means is that any proposed development over 12 metres, which 4 stories would be over 12 metres, would be subject to a design excellence review panel, which council would conduct if a development application was lodged to council. This clause is in order to try and achieve the best design outcomes for the Narimban Local Centre. The panelists that are chosen are architects or town planners who have a high reputation in the field. And so we obtain advice with regards to whether a proposed development achieves a great design outcome for the local centre and community. And so the design excellence requirement will be applicable to redevelopment of the Narimban Local Centre. Other general LEP improvements include removing anomalies, so just certain errors, introducing a new urban heat clause. As mentioned before, urban heat is quite an issue these days, especially with the issue of climate change being more apparent. I mean, Narimban Local Centre is quite a small centre, so it would still need, a development would still need to show that it has an acceptable urban heat impact for the centre and surrounding area. This is just another slide that shows that we're correcting anomalies. So for example, for heritage items, this was meant to show that the entire site was meant to be listed and not just a portion of it. I'll just move on after this. So the conceptual master plans that I showed you on the previous slides will be included within our proposed Willoughby Development Control Plan. That's in Part L for anyone who wants to view that on Council's website. It really does guide what we are trying to achieve for the Naremburn Local Centre for the future. And development applications would be subject to the proposed new controls to ensure that there are, for example, the heritage items are maintained and that any new development will not have an adverse impact on those items and the shop facades that front Willoughby Road. So if anyone wants to have a look, it's in Part L of the Willoughby Development Control Plan. I think that's it from me. I'm going to hand you over to Ian Arnott, who's going to discuss the more about the local environmental plan.
Thanks very much, Chris, and thank you all for your attendance tonight. Chris has given a good overview of the proposed provisions in our draft LEP and DCP for the commercial centre, the commercial local centre, based on that local centre strategy. I'm focusing more on housing and the remaining housing area around the local centres. And that's based on primarily on our housing strategy that has also been adopted by Council back in 2020. and we're now translating into the local environmental plan and development control plan. So the housing strategy, as Norma previously mentioned, we've been given a target of 6,700 new dwellings by 2036 to provide within our area to accommodate the growing population. The housing strategy focused on three main areas for the provision of those dwellings, the majority of which is around the Chatswood CBD. The local centres, including Naremburn, is the second focus area, and the third focus area is the existing residential flat zones. So there are two main reasons for those being the focus of that additional housing. One is the local centres, and more importantly, the Chatswood CBD, are located in areas that are close to public transport links, accessible, provide good access to services, retail and other facilities. And that's an innate principle within planning to reduce car usage and as Andrew was speaking about before, provide for that healthy urban environment. The second reason is to limit the spread of our residential densities and residential unit development into the lower density areas. We recognise the important character of our low density areas in providing that we have here in the Willoughby LGA, and we saw the importance of protecting those areas, not certainly the heritage conservation areas, but also just the low density character, and that also assists in providing a diversity of housing. So the main changes in the LEP relating to housing are looking at moving from what has been referred to as a floor space ratio control, so the ratio of the floor space of a development to its site area, to a straight gross floor area control, still based on site area, but giving a numeric figure. And to align that with what is permissible in the code set, the State Environmental Planning Policy Exempt and Complying Development Code. And we see this primarily as a matter of equity, that if on one site someone is not required to come to council to get approval, they can come to council, but if they satisfy all of the code SEP requirements, which is a ticker box assessment as to whether it satisfies the numeric requirements and doesn't involve any merit assessment, they can get a complying development certificate either through council or through a private certifier. If on the site next door to that, a development doesn't comply with one component, for example, a setback standard, they would be required to go through a development application. And it's seen that for a matter of equity, that assessment should be against generally the same controls, and really assessing that area of non-compliance as being the primary assessment, rather than imposing far stringent controls where they would have otherwise been able to do it under a complying development certificate at a higher floor space control, for example. There is one exception that we're looking at with that, and that is in respect to landscaping. We see, as I've mentioned, the importance both for the character of our low density areas, and also for the health, the environmental health of our areas, to retain and enhance our landscaping controls. And so we're not aligning with the code SEP in respect to the landscaping controls, and we're looking to, in fact, strengthen those controls by incorporating them in the local environmental plan rather than where they now sit within the development control plan. Similarly, we're looking to do the same with our dual occupancy controls to align with the code SEP, with the exception of landscaping provision. Further, the Code SEP has incorporated provisions for manor house development, that being development of up to 4 dwellings over 2 stories. Traditionally, back in the 30s and 40s, it was the 2 units downstairs, 2 flats downstairs, 2 flats upstairs. It doesn't have to be in that form, but it is up to 4 units on the one site at 2 stories in a residential flat zone. That under the Code SEP is allowed for 600 on sites of 600 square metres, unless the council controls require a larger site area for such development. We're recommending that we impose the same control that would apply to residential flat development generally of 1,100 square metres. The primary reason for that is, rather than allowing each individual site to be developed on its own, the consolidation of sites would enable a greater provision of dwellings consistent with trying to achieve that dwelling house target, and would also, in our view, provide a better outcome rather than the units that go down with units looking into each other alongside boundaries. Where, as has already been mentioned, we're also looking at increasing the affordable housing provision in development. So just to show some examples of dwellings, the left 2 on the left-hand side of the screen are dwellings that have been approved under complying development, and the right-hand side dwellings approved under a development application. You can see, at least from a streetscape perspective, the scale of those developments is not dissimilar, their presentation to the street. I should point out that these controls are not applying to our heritage conservation areas or to our environmental living zones, what are now referred to as the C4 zones. So we're talking about only in those areas where a complying development certificate can be approved for this form of development. If you just like to look at the table on the left-hand side of the page, this is our current local environmental plan control for floor space ratio. And the third column there shows what that relates to, or it applies as a gross floor area control. If you go to the line that says 301 to 400, the third line down on the left-hand side, and go across, you can see that a 400 square metre site achieves a 200 square metre maximum floor space. However, if you go to the next line down, a 401 square metre site goes backwards in terms of the floor space achievable. Where a gross floor area control is applied, that provides a continual increase with the increase in site area. So for reasons of equity, that is also seen to be appropriate. Just looking at the landscape controls, the table on the left is our current development control plan provisions for landscaping for single dwelling houses. And what we propose to incorporate as our local environmental plan control. The table on the right is the complying development control for landscaping. And you can see in all instances, council's control exceeds that of the complying development code. So just running through an example of a development that was approved under complying development. This has a site area of 650 square metres. Under council's LEP, a maximum of 279 square metres was achievable. Under the code SEP, and as proposed under our draft LEP, a maximum of 335 square metres would be approvable. And you can see that that's quite a bit more. There's quite a jump in the amount of floor space achievable. In this instance, 312 square metres was proposed and approved. In terms of landscaping, 266 square metres would have been required under our current development control plan, and as we propose under the draft LEP, under the code SEP, only 195 square metres is required. In this instance, 255 square metres was provided, which is fairly comparable to what our controls require, a little less. Going to move on to dual occupancy and just run through the 4 types of dual occupancy that may be developed. The first is an attached side-by-side dual occupancy. That's in the top left-hand corner. The top right-hand corner, attached one above the other. The bottom left-hand corner, detached, both with a street frontage. So that's on a corner site, that particular one. And so both dwellings have a street frontage. And the bottom right-hand corner, detached in a battle axe formation. Under the code SEP, the bottom right-hand corner form, the battle axe form, is not a permissible form of dual occupancy to be done as complying development. And we're proposing to also prohibit that form of dual occupancy. You can see from the bottom right-hand corner that the battle axe form results in dwellings generally intruding into the backyard zone, utilising a lot of the backyard area and removing opportunities for things such as canopy tree planting, which we see as characteristic of our area and important for addressing the urban heat effects. It can also result with that intrusion into the backyard as a greater impost on neighbouring properties in terms of outlook, bulk, potentially overshadowing and privacy issues. So what we are proposing for dual occupancy is to align the gross floor area controls with that of the code SEP, something that a property owner can do currently under that code SEP. We're looking at aligning the controls for gross floor area. However, changing the control relating to landscaping, which currently under our development control plan for dual occupancy is 35% of the site area, changing that control to align with our dwelling house control for landscaping and incorporating it into the local environmental plan. We see that if a dual occupancy is permissible in the same on a site in which a dwelling house is permissible, then that landscaping, that character and that contribution that the landscaped area provides should apply in an equal form to that dual occupancy as it does to the dwelling house. Also under the code SEP, subdivision of dual occupancy can occur immediately, whereas under our current local environmental plan, it requires 5 years until it can be subdivided, 5 years after construction. So under the draft local environmental plan, we're proposing to allow for immediate subdivision as being permissible. So running through an example here again, there is no change to our minimum lot size for dual occupancy, which for attached is 700 square metres and detached 900 square metres. In this instance, the site area was 730. They proposed an attached side-by-side dual occupancy of 292 square metres, which was the maximum permissible under the LEP control at the currently. Under the draft, under the code SEP, and also under our draft LEP, a 482 square metre floor space would be permissible. And you can see that's a significant increase in floor space that's achievable, is currently achievable under the code SEP, and would be achievable under our draft local environmental plan with us aligning with that. Under our development control plan, the landscaped area requirement was 255 square metres and 311 square metres was provided in this instance. Under the code SEP, in fact, more landscaping would be provided than our current control, that 35% control that we currently have. 265 square metres would be required under the code set. However, we're recommending that in our draft LEP, that be 308 square metres, consistent with what we'd require for a dwelling house on a similar size site. Just moving on to manor houses, as I mentioned, under the code set, manor houses are permitted in the R3 zone. And if council doesn't specify a minimum site area, they're permissible up to 1,100, up to, on a site of 600 square metres. We propose to specify a minimum lot size of 1,100 square metres for those reasons that I said earlier about not undercooking our residential flat zones, and also for means of getting what we see as better form of development. In respect to affordable housing, our current controls for new residential flat development or shop top housing development require 4% in addition, 4% provision of affordable housing, which is in addition to the permissible floor space on the site. Our local strategic planning statement committed to increasing that to 7% by 2021 and 10% by 2026, consistent with what the North District Plan, the State Government North District Plan, sought to achieve. The 2021 date has already passed, as is obvious, and it takes time to bring in such provisions. So we're jumping straight to the 10%, or that's our recommendation in the draft LEP. That 10%, however, would be contained within the permissible floor space on the site. The floor space controls are generally brought about by looking at what the bulk and scale of development achieved by such floor space is. And so for that reason, we see it appropriate to, or important to incorporate into that bulk and scale the affordable housing rather than on top of, in which case you'd be getting a greater bulk and scale than the original floor space was derived from. On exhibition or available with the exhibition of the draft LEP and DCP is a feasibility report undertaken by SGS Planning and Economics in respect to the feasibility of applying such a control. And for some areas, the report says that it is quite feasible to achieve a 10% affordable housing provision, and in some reduced provision may be necessary for development to be feasible. We're interested in your feedback on that as well. So just to give an overview of the draft development control plan, we've sought to make it a more user-friendly document. It is provided in 12 parts, and it's sought to the extent possible, direct you to a part for the type of development you're proposing. So for residential development, you would be primarily looking at Part B, or if you're in an environmental living zone, a C4 zone, Part C of the DCP. It divides it into minor and major developments. So low density, single dwellings, dual occupancy development classified as minor, residential flat development, shop top housing development, major. So just running through, in the R2 zone, the controls seeking to align with the code set, with the exception of landscaping, which is to be incorporated into the LEP and not consistent with the code set. In C4 zone, those controls remain the same, generally the same, with the requirement for some additional documentation or really clarifying the additional documentation required if you're adjoining bushland or a place of potential Aboriginal significance, and also as similar to the R2 zone, placing the landscape controls into the local environmental plan. The heritage conservation areas Again, primarily clarifying information. We are not about the demolition of buildings that contribute to the heritage significance of our conservation areas. Our controls seek to retain such buildings. However, if a landowner sees that there is strong justification for the demolition of their building, that is a contributory element, we're detailing the type of documentation that would be required to demonstrate that, and that's things such as structural engineers reports and things showing that the building is incapable of being retained in a livable form. We've also incorporated additional controls in respect to semi-detached development, something that has been lacking from our DCP in respect to heritage conservation areas, and also just reinforcing the importance of protecting the external fabric and streetscape character. For the residential flat zones and for shop top housing, we're looking at aligning with the state government apartment design guide, and where there is where the apartment design guide doesn't specify the controls, our existing controls would apply. We've also incorporated deep soil controls. So if it's commercial or shop top housing development that is being looked at for the Narimban Centre, for example, then you would be referring to Part B for the residential component, Part D for the commercial component, and also, as Chris mentioned, Part L, which incorporates our place-based controls, and that is really a reflection of what the local centre strategy envisaged for the Naremburn Centre. It may be necessary to go to other parts of the development control plan as well, such as transport and parking. There have been some changes to that based on the integrated transport strategy, which is looking at a travel demand management approach where it's encouraging use of public transport. These are in areas such as accessible locations like where residential flat development is proposed, by minimising car parking requirements to discourage car ownership and to encourage the use of public transport. In respect to vegetation management, changes to that part of the development control plan were adopted in 2020, and there are minimal further changes proposed there. Water management, those changes were adopted in 2019, and again, minimum changes, but some minor changes to clarify the provisions. And sustainability, building sustainability, Part J, adopted in November 2020, and in that instance, no further changes proposed. So I think we're moving on to questions now, and I think there have been some coming through the Q&A, and we'll also see if anyone from the chamber that's in the room tonight wishes to ask any questions as well.
If people in the chamber, thank you, Ian. That was really a lot of detailed information for people to digest this evening and on the webinar. It's always very helpful, I think, though, for you to go through it the way you do. So if anybody in the chamber wants to ask a question, we'll give you a microphone so others on the webinar can hear you. So I think Jason's got a microphone here. So we've got a question in the front here. Thank you very much.
I just have a clarification, Chris, from about the development in the shopping precinct that you kept talking about. You would maintain the facades. Is there still going to be two-story height along that area?
Because Chris is the detail man for the controlled numbers. So
yeah. Sorry.
So to answer your question, yes, there is a proposal to allow for a further 2 stories above the existing
above
shops.
the facade. Yeah.
There's a control for a 3-metre setback so that the new stories don't impose on the existing facades or don't remove the facades.
Okay.
But these controls are not set. You appreciate these are draft controls that we're asking for your feedback on. So they come from the strategy, which was endorsed, but this is another opportunity to refine them to the community satisfaction.
Can I have, sorry, another question? I just need it. In the heritage area, you're talking about if a demolition is approved because it's gone through certain processes, structural engineering processes, for example, what are the controls on the new build in the heritage area?
Yes, so those controls wouldn't change and would be as are currently reflected in our heritage section of the DC Development Control Plan. And it really is trying to ensure that the new development is fits in comfortably with the streetscape, doesn't detract and doesn't stand out as something that draws your eye to it. Rather, it's fitting in with the streetscape character of the area.
Okay. And I have a final one. This is just a general one because there's obviously been a lot of work involved in getting this draft together over many years. My concern is how enforceable is the LEP in say in the Land and Environment Court?
That's a question that applies to any local environmental plan, whether it's the draft one that we're hoping to bring into place or it's the existing local environmental plan. And they are open to challenge. They are open to challenge, but the more they become more defendable, potentially the more recently they've been adopted, the more community consultation that we've gone into it is saying this is what the community wants to see, and the more consistently they're applied, I would suggest. But certainly as a statutory document, the court is obliged to consider and implement that through the legal system.
Okay, thanks.
So now, Tanya, we'll take a question from the people who are tuned in on the webinar, please, if you've got something to offer us.
Thank you, Norma. We've got a question here. Some proposed building heights talk of number of stories, e.g. 4 stories, and some refer to height in metres. For clarity, which is proposed to be in the LEP? If it is metres, will protrusions for lift cores, solar panels on roofs, etc. be allowed?
So the first part of that question was whether the maximum height will be stipulated in metres or stories. It is stipulated in metres within the proposed local environmental plan. The second part of that question was whether there may be possible provisions to allow for breaches in height limits for things such as lift overruns and solar panels. I think that because this is a new master plan for this Narimban local centre, there are no precedences, and I think that the maximum height limit would be easier to justify and to implement. Look, there may be some occasions where a developer may argue that a breach in the height limit for a lift core is required, but there needs to be stringent justification for that to occur. And because these controls are proposed brand new across the Narimban local centre, we would be really stringent with the controls to ensure that an unnecessary breach doesn't occur for any proposal.
I might just add to that, Chris, if that's okay, that the definition of height is as set by the state government and is stipulated in the local environmental plan, but we can't change that definition, and does include the lift core. It doesn't include things such as TV antennas, for example. So it's quite specific. Lift cores are, I understand where the question's coming from, because they do often seek to vary the standard based on the lift core, and often that's because of arguments around it's not visible from a pedestrian on the street, for example. It's centred in the middle of the building, those sorts of things. So, and there is provision in the legislation under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act, allowing for a clause in the local environmental plan for variations to be sought where justified, having gone requiring it to go through a very specific test. Chris is quite right that where it's a recently implemented control, it's harder to demonstrate that variation, and it's because we have considered things such as the lift core as and allowing for that in the height controls that we've arrived at for this.
So do we have another question from the chamber?
Good evening, it's Rob Forsyth. I'm the president of the Chamber of Commerce. I have a couple of questions for Chris. One thing is the black roof policy. I know that we're going to, I know the photographs on your plan there, you have black roofs, and one moment you're talking about heat problems. And are you going to keep on allowing that scenario?
Right. So I think you're referring to the black roof policies in terms of mitigating climate impacts. Look, I think proposed developments is subject to BASIC's requirements. I'm not too sure whether that still allows for dark roofs to occur.
And we do also have a sustainable building sustainability section of the DCP. It doesn't specify roof colour specifically, and there are other concerns about going to a reflective roof material in terms of locations where that can cause disturbance to surrounding properties. So, but you know, both under our sustainable section and, as Chris said, under the basics, it is required to show that they are achieving sustainable.
But our Urban Heat Island, new provision for Urban Heat Island impacts to mitigate against those has got controls there that we're proposing.
Right.
So have a look at those, and if you can think you can improve on those, that would be something we'd be very keen to hear about.
Because leads into when you propose with your development, you're talking about green space. How are you hoping that developers achieve that? Because you know, developers are going to work at different rates. The second thing about that is when you rebuild the buildings, that means you're putting businesses out of business, and the time frame for those businesses to come re-established would be completely different. And you're talking about, you know, when are you talking about you think these things are going to happen? Do you have an idea?
Well, it will happen when developers come forward to make it happen, basically. Yeah. We put the rules in place. We set the opportunities.
But you'd have experience, would you, you know, what do you think? 10 years?
We would hope, definitely within 10 years, we'd see movement on a plan like this.
Because I've got to go back and talk to the businesses back there and say, well, look, in 10 years' time, they're going to be gone. Because that's the fact. That you know, that's you've got to be real about those people, businesses we closed down, places to be redeveloped. And then the other thing that's very underlying that you have to be aware of, retail is dramatically changing. I've been in business 40 years, and in the last 4 years, because of our friend COVID, the whole marketing and retailing way has changed dramatically onto online. So a lot of people in business go, why should I be paying rent for a shop front and just have a warehouse?
Well, this gets to the very heart of planning.
That's right. I understand. I sort of bring it up to make people aware of this because...
which we are.
Yeah, okay.
But we're still planning for places that people want to come together and
share. Yeah, that's what I'm intrigued.
Conversations. And
How do we know that in 5 years' time or 10 years' time, that's going to be the thing that's going to work there?
Well, it may not centre specifically around retail. What we see is that people are still going to want to come together, have a community hub, have a community hub. We're not specifying that it has to be retail. We think there will be some retail because people will still want to get their milk and bread and get a coffee and whatever it is. But it can be a range of other non-residential uses that draw people together.
Yeah, I agree. I just want to be aware of talking on behalf of the businesses there. You know, let you know that there is concern about these things.
We are aware of that.
Yeah.
And conscious that it's not just an easy fix at all. It's
No,
very,
very hard, long term.
Yeah, that's
right. Sorry, I did make a note and I've lost my point. We'll leave it at that then. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Tanya, do you have another question from the webinar?
Yes, we've got another one here with regard to conservation areas. What does information required for justifying demolition include, and what are the changes in that area? I assume in regards to the LEP.
This is probably more around the development control plan rather than the local environmental plan. And as I tried to mention that we currently do not favour demolition of heritage items, and if someone seeks to demolish, not just heritage items, but also buildings that contribute to the heritage significance of a conservation area. And if someone seeks to apply for that, we already seek information to demonstrate why, in their view, it's justified. And as I mentioned, it would be things such as structural engineers' reports or the extent of change to that building that really says that it no longer contributes to the heritage significance of the area. Those are the sorts of things that we seek information around at the moment if someone comes to us on that basis. And really, the change to the development control plan is just making that clear and explicit. It's not in any way trying to encourage demolition of contributing heritage buildings, and it's certainly something we don't want to encourage.
Would there be another question from the chamber here tonight, Roger?
Thank you. We've heard the term aspirational previously used with regard to future housing targets, especially at the political level. What are the consequences if the housing targets are not achieved?
I don't know whether there are any particularly real consequences. It's probably a naming and shaming business, you know, where we're actually identified in the Sydney Morning Herald as being an unproductive council or whatever. But there's the 6,700 dwelling target to 2036 that we've come up with is something that we've worked on ourselves based on the expected population increase. And we will keep that under review during the life of the plan as we keep monitoring the housing delivery and housing need throughout the life of the plan. But we believe we've got to still plan for the long term and have a good, broad, long-term strategy so that we identify the best places to focus on housing delivery and the best combination of housing diversity that we need as the population changes. Bigger homes, smaller apartments, what's required now for the makeup of the population. So I don't know about any penalties that we might suffer if we don't meet that target.
Well, I would just say perhaps, you know, I mean, the target has been provided, by the state government, that we have to demonstrate how we're going to achieve the dwelling numbers. And if from past experience, you know, Ku-ring-gai Council had their powers removed when they didn't demonstrate that they could achieve, they were willing to provide for that housing growth. And so the powers were taken over by the state government. And so if we're not doing what the state government's asking us to do, that is one of the possibilities.
That's true.
I do have another question.
Yeah. Do you want to ask yourself the other question while you've got the microphone?
Okay. Just a question of clarification. We've been speaking during the presentation about affordable housing. What actually defines affordable housing? Because I heard in the press that it's 30% of the average income. So that must vary from area to area. Could you explain how that process works?
Yes, I'm not sure whether you've got the actual,
Well,
it is 30% of the household income to be paid on rent.
And so any affordable housing dwellings that are dedicated to council in these new developments are managed by an affordable housing provider. And they determine the eligibility of people to occupy those units based on those standards.
So they do have monetary requirements or income requirements before they.
There's a certain set criteria that these housing providers utilise from Australian Bureau of Statistics where if your household income is less than a certain amount and is classified as low income, then you would be eligible to be on the waiting list for affordable housing. I don't know the figure off the top of my head, but it is targeted towards those where their household incomes are just categorized as low income earners.
And it is based on census information about, you know, the average wages for the local area.
And do you have an issue that you wanted to raise with regard to how that's calculated or how that's applied? You just wondered how it's done. Yeah.
There has been a question asked online for the benefit of those that are in the room. We will be sending out the questions and the responses that have been answered online in 10 working days. And that was one of them. And there is information at our website about that criteria as well, if you want to do a search at the council website.
Yes, quite specific criteria. I'm sorry we don't have those figures right at our fingertips tonight.
It's pretty easy to find.
Yeah.
There's no other questions, live questions.
There is from the chamber. This may be the last question then, unless others have got.
I've got a couple. Larissa Penn, I'm the president of the Progress Association in Naremburn. A couple of quick ones and maybe less quick ones. Just clarifying landscaped areas, the permeable area in the site, is that what we're referring to when you're talking about the...
Yes, not hard landscaping, soft landscaping.
Soft landscaping, okay, that was a quick one. The frontages at Naremburn, are we talking about preserving all the frontages or just the heritage ones? Because there's a bit of hidden miss along that corridor there.
Do you mean are we preserving all of the frontages?
Yes.
Yes, the intention is
That's the
to
intent.
have 3 metre setback for... Oh, sorry.
He's using his hands, I can understand.
So yes,
Okay.
I understand that we would like to maintain the facade of those existing shops.
Yeah.
There's a control in the DCP that has a 3 metre setback for the additional stories.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. What our concern was that we'd get some frontages maintained and then others being modern, and we'd lose the sort of conservation heritage value through the corridor. Conservation, sorry,
Larissa, I just add to that to say that, you know, there is at least one I can think of that perhaps doesn't add to the heritage significance, being the building at the far north. And so we would be seeking perhaps to not retain that facade and replace it with something that fitted in with the
Is there opportunity to have some consistency in terms of conservation, like colour, those sorts of things, when things are updated, signage, that kind of thing, in terms of maintaining that conservation area?
I think there is, because when, you know, a development application is lodged to council, it is assessed in regards to its impact on the heritage items that exist there, and how will this new development fit in seamlessly with the existing facades that have a positive contribution to the local sense and community.
Okay.
So yes,
that's part of that design excellence.
That would be as well.
Yeah.
It can be a little bit difficult because of the exempt development provisions that can allow for change in colour of a building without reference to council, things such as that. So there can be some difficulties around.
Okay. You said the new floor space ratio to the gross area controls don't apply to conservation areas. Does that mean that the conservation areas will still be measured via floor space ratios? Or do they also adopt the new gross area controls?
No, it is floor space ratio.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Just with the expansion, I guess, along Pacific Highway, north and south Chatswood, going to Chatswood now, has there been any assessment along the lines of looking at the traffic situation on Pacific Highway? I know you're trying to encourage more public transport use and less car use, but the reality is that corridor is extremely congested already. Has there been any sort of work with the state government in terms of that corridor and the traffic implications?
We're always working with the state government on that in terms of these new initiatives like Movement in Place, because we'd like the Pacific Highway as it goes through Chatswood to be more of a place than a movement corridor.
Yeah.
But whether or not we'll achieve that, so we're always talking to Transport for New South Wales about opportunities to modify the quality of traffic on the Pacific Highway, but it's a difficult task.
It's very challenging.
Very challenging.
I'm sorry to ask so many questions. The sustainability guidelines seem to be focused on resilience, which is great, and the heat island effects and things like that. I think it's fantastic that there's more focus on that. Are there going to be further focuses on sustainable building practice and things like mandating electrification, vehicle power charging in developments and things like that?
We're proposing electric vehicle charging in new high-rise buildings or new multi-dwelling developments in our new DCP. So that's included in that. But in terms of electrification of buildings, you might want to make that a submission. Every time I turn the gas on at home, I get a ping of my conscience, you know. It's going to be a challenge for us all to transfer over.
Okay, no, that's good feedback. I'm sorry for all this. Out of the 6,700, because you said that commitment was made in 2020, we've got the Channel 9 site development, Wald Street, you know, there's huge numbers of developments all around Naremburn. Yeah. How much of that is accounted for already and what's already been approved? Or are you talking about new approvals from now?
No,
that would be included in the 6,700 because that's taken from the housing strategy that we did back in.
That's good to know. And I'll just make one comment, sorry. I've had a few complaints from people about complying developments and privacy issues. Where do we look for any privacy controls in the LEP DCP? Is that something that the council are concerned with? Because my concern is the more we sort of push through the complying developments and the densification, perhaps the more we're going to lose some of those aspects of privacy, and particularly with the high rise overlooking sort of the low rise areas.
Well, privacy controls are in our DCP. You know, council does also share those concerns with regards to complying. Council also does share concerns, as you raised, in terms of compliant development. When they made those changes to the exempted complying codes, we did lodge a submission with regards to those changes. As you know, that is a state legislation. So if someone had a compliant development, they could go ahead and council would not be able to intervene or prevent that from happening. So it is an issue that we recognise, but we do have privacy controls within our DCP to attempt to mitigate those potential adverse outcomes that may occur from development.
But the specific, in terms of the draft DCP, the specific part to look for regarding residential development would be part B for that, either for, unless it's environmental living zone, which is the part C of the DCP. So you'd be able to find those parts
in there. And where do people, if they feel like a complying development isn't in fact complying, where do they go? Is that part of the, is there a recourse there for people? Do they come back
They'd
to
have
council?
to go to the accredited certifier.
Straight to the
body
certifier.
that is dealing with the accredited certifiers. It's not,
or perhaps the Building Professionals Board,
which deals with the accredited certifiers. That's right.
And I promise this is the last one. We have a lot of very long blocks in Naremburn with back rear lanes, and you said that battle axes weren't your preferred mode of dual occupancy. I can see that would be a challenging situation for people in Naremburn just because of the nature of the blocks. And so is a battle axe dual occupancy something that would be looked at if there was a rear lane situation rather than a...
Oh, rear lane, did you say?
Rear lane, sorry.
I think that would enable what is defined as a two-street frontage.
Right.
So as long as it has two-street frontage, or both dwellings have a street frontage,
right,
then it's not a battle axe form. It's where it's really...
It's where you're coming through the property to the rear property. Okay, thank you. Thanks so much.
I'm usually a very strict timekeeper, and I think we've exceeded our 7:30 deadline here. I won't blame me, I'll blame someone else. So we can move on to the final slide now and just let everybody know that reiterate really the exhibition is on to the 7th of June, which overall is a period of 12 weeks. And we're running these webinars. This is the 7th, there's 5 more coming for different local areas. And certainly the feedback we've received tonight and other feedback we get will be going into an independent feedback report that we'll take to council, we think around October. and say, look, this is what people have told us, and this is the changes we think we need to make now, or we don't think we need to make any changes, which I think is a bit unlikely. And that will determine whether or not we go on exhibition again later this year, or whether we can go straight to making the plan at the end of the year, which is one option. With another exhibition, we'd be moving into next year to finalize the new LEP, and with the changes that have come about as a result of feedback. I think all that remains is, Tanya, you remind us about things going onto the website tomorrow, don't you usually?
Yes, that's right. So by the end of close of business tomorrow, we'll have the recording up on the Happy to Say. We'll also have a copy of the slide back in case you want to go back and have a look at any more of those details. And in 10 working days, we'll have the questions and answers that people didn't get to see during the live webinar. All of the live webinar questions, you can just watch the recording for those as they are. Thank you.
Thanks, Tanya. And just remains to say good night. Thank you, everybody, for coming, those in the chamber particularly. I really appreciate your presence here tonight. Thank you, everybody, and good night.